大家早安，真的很谢谢大家这么踊跃的报名，然后都非常的准时，我们真的对大家踊跃报名还有参加非常的感谢。那大家好，我是 Peggy，我是Mango Steam 台湾的产品经理。那我们代理 Learning A-Z 这个产品已经非常多年，有些认识我的老师其实已经知道我们从2012年就开始 Learning A-Z 在台湾的独家代理了。那中间我们也办过非常多活动，比如说跟阿奇老师也办过活动，或者是在学校也有办活动。所以因为现在疫情关系，我们做这个线上的这个 webinar。那今天的主题会是呢，跨学科英语的阅读课程规划，会由我们的 Jennifer 博士来跟大家介绍。那在这个研习的过程当中，老师有任何的问题都可以在这个聊天室里面写出来，用英文写的我们会有Kevin 来回答，用中文写的我们就会有 Daniel 来负责这样子，或者是Jennifer 在讲的过程有任何不了解的，也可以在聊天室里面提出这样子。然后如果有老师，目前我们看到老师都有就是开视讯，这也非常好。其实 Jennifer 会蛮喜欢大家有开视讯，因为他可能会有一些互动的过程，可能对他的说法有赞成的，他可能会叫你比个赞之类的，就是可以一起有一些互动这样子。那我们现在就把时间交给 Jennifer 来开始吧。Okay, so let's start. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Peggy, for starting our webinar off. And on behalf of Learning A-Z, I officially want to welcome everybody here this morning. It is such a pleasure to have you, and it's such a pleasure to be able to share with you today some information and resources that we hope can make an impact in your classroom and also make an impact in your students' work. Now, just a little introduction of myself. I think, as Peggy may have mentioned, my name is Jennifer Nigh, and I'm the Director of International Academics and Curriculum at Learning A-Z. And I am streaming live to you all this evening for me from the state of Ohio. And my role at Learning A-Z is to work with educators just like yourselves all around the world to talk about literacy and language and how to incorporate our resources into your classroom in meaningful ways. My background is education. I was a teacher myself. I taught first and second grade and was also a literacy specialist here in the States. So the resources and the ideas that I'm going to share with you tonight come from educators just like yourselves and my experiences and workings with you all around the world, and also my personal experiences from my own classroom and using these resources with my own children. I believe, as Peggy mentioned, we are using our go-to webinar today. So just a couple features to kind of help ensure that our webinar is successful is that we really want you to use that chat box today. As I already mentioned, for some of you that were logged in a couple minutes early, feel free to write your comments or your questions in either English or Chinese. I have colleagues that are joining us today that will be able to respond in either language. I will be able to comment on questions and responses in English because unfortunately I can't read or read Chinese. So I'm really grateful for my Mango Steams colleagues who are here today to help out with that and to help facilitate this webinar. So thank you to my colleagues in Taiwan. We're grateful for your partnership and your support. I also want to mention that this webinar is being recorded. So if you would like, the recording can be made available to you after today's session to review on your own or to also share with any of your colleagues. If at any time you run into any technological problems, A couple troubleshooting tips that you might want to try is to turn off your webcam. You're welcome to leave it on, but if you find that it inhibits your bandwidth in any way, sometimes it helps to turn it off. We'll also ask that you keep your microphones muted during this session. That way we don't have any feedback that can disturb the rest of our participants. And then finally, notice up at the top, there is a website, support.zoom.us. Please feel free to make note of that. That's a great website if you're experiencing any technical difficulties during the webinar. It often has some solutions for you to be able to quickly fix that problem and re-engage with the webinar. Okay, so with that said, I would like everybody to find that chat box and give me a big smiley face in the chat box if you are ready to get started. I'm gonna look for those smiley faces. Excellent. I see Angel's smiley face in the webcam, so I love that. Perfect. And I see lots. I see a smiley face from Lindy and Angel and Janice. Fabulous. Jocelyn, welcome. All right. That means I am ready to get going. All right. So ladies and gentlemen, let's set the stage. So as educators, as we all are, we know that curriculum and initiatives often drive a change in our practices and the materials we use in our classrooms. For example, as educators in Taiwan, you may be considering the changing expectations that have been put forth by your MOE 108 curriculum and the changing nature of the high stakes assessments that your students are required to take. This change or this shift that these two components have are that they're shifting towards a literacy-based framework that prioritizes the application of knowledge through authentic problem solving. So again, we know as educators that we always have these changes. All of these new rules, all this new curriculum and standards are always being put in front of us. And that really sometimes makes us wonder. I don't know about you, but when I was a teacher, when these types of changes happened to me, I often found myself with a lot of questions and hoping for some really practical and easy to implement ideas. All of this is good stuff, but I want to know what I can easily do in my classroom. Give me a yes in the chat box if you think that also. If you're wondering, just tell me something that I can easily do in my classroom. Yes, I see a big exclamation point. Absolutely. We hear you. I hear you. We are all teachers, and that's what we're always looking for. So the good news is, ladies and gentlemen, that today, my hope is for you to leave this session with some practical, easy to implement ideas and resources that can help you meet the demands of the MOE 108 curriculum and the changing nature of your high stakes exams. Now, to accomplish this goal in the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to talk about 3 concepts. And those 3 concepts are motivation to read, engagement in reading, and cross-curricular teaching and learning. All 3 of these things are going to work together easily, efficiently, and effectively so that you can not only meet the demands of your MOE 108 curriculum and high stakes assessments, but so that you can also have fun while you're doing it. All right, I hope you're smiling behind those cameras because I hope you're thinking, all right, I want that information and I want to be able to do that in my classroom. So let's get started with these first 2 concepts, motivation to read and engagement in reading. From my experience and my workings with educators all around the world, I have found that these 2 concepts really drive the success we have as teachers, but most importantly, the success our students have, whether it's with concepts such as new curriculum like the MOE 108, or whether it has to do with any subject matter, if our students are not motivated and engaged, it's a real struggle for us to do what we do best, and that's to teach, and for them to learn what they need to learn. So let's break these two concepts down a little bit. And let's start with motivation. I want you in the chat box, in your own words, to tell me, what is motivation? What do you think about when you think about that concept? What is motivation? What is motivation? So let's see what we can come up with. I like that. Angel says, willing to learn. Excellent. Christine, same thing. Willing to learn something. Excellent. Willing to do. Ooh, I like this one. Tracy says, eager to learn. I like that one too. I like that. I think Seth said, I lost it in my chat box, the drive or desire. Great words. Ooh, Jessie says, to do something proactively. Fabulous. Here's another good one. The inner desire to do something without requesting from other people. Good thought. Grace says a desire to learn. Amanda, eager to know. Ooh, Angel, I like this one too. Something that ignites the desire to learn. Yes, that's exactly what we want, because that is what's going to get us to be able to accomplish our instructional goals. Good. Curiosity, enthusiasm. Everybody, these are phenomenal ideas, and you are spot on. So what is motivation, or in this case, motivation to read? So it's an individual's goals, values, and beliefs about topics, processes, and outcomes. Motivation is really about the thoughts and our feelings, okay? So when we have thoughts and feelings about something, it drives us or it motivates us to accomplish it. So let me give you a couple examples. I have here on the screen this adorable puppy. So this adorable puppy is actually my new puppy named Lou. And we just got her a couple months ago. So as I was preparing to bring her home, I was really motivated to read a lot of articles and magazines and blog posts about how to take care of her. I had a purpose, okay? I had a feeling towards this. So it drove me to do that and accomplish my goal, okay? So it was that feeling and that thought that got me going. Now let's look at this other picture here. This is actually, I have 3 kids. These are my 2 girls. My son is not present in this picture. But this picture represents my oldest daughter, who is going to be going off to university in a year. So she's 17 and she's starting to think about colleges that she wants to attend. Now, she's a teenager, so she doesn't really get too excited about sitting down and reading articles about different universities, and she doesn't do it for fun. But she's motivated to do it because she wants to learn more about these universities so that she can make an informed decision. So motivation does not always have to be something that feels really good. It doesn't have to be, it has to have a personal feeling towards it. And that's what we want our kids to have in our classrooms. We want them to be motivated to achieve an outcome, okay? Now, that's only one part of the puzzle. We also need our students to be engaged. So grab that chat box again for me. What does engagement mean to you? So we just talked about motivation, but how is engagement different? Tell me in the chat box. What do you think? Fully involved. Good. Excellent. I like that one. Enjoying, insisting on doing. That's a good one. I like that. Being hooked, Jessie says. Participation, involvement. Ooh, I like this one from Leo. Interaction, not only with the teacher, but with the books. Very good. All right. Willing to learn. Good. Participation. Love to read. Excellent. These are all fantastic ideas. So what is engagement? So remember, motivation is about the heart and the head, but engagement is our involvement as reflected by our behavior, affect, or cognition. So this is more behavior oriented. Let's look at an example. Look at this girl right here. Okay. She is engaged in her task. She is attentive, as you can see, to the laptop and also the books that are in front of her. Her body language and her facial expressions reflect that engagement. And if we were there next to her or on the computer having a conversation with her, we might be able to gauge her engagement by talking with her about what she's reading or what she's doing. Now, engagement also doesn't always mean positive. Perhaps this girl is really looking deeply at this laptop and these books, but maybe she has a frown in her face. She's still engaged because she's working through that process and demonstrating that cognitively. So we want our kids to not only be motivated to do something, to have that drive in their hearts, in their heads, but we also want to be able to observe that they are engaged in the task. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I had a hard time with these in my classroom. Sometimes my kids were motivated, but they weren't engaged. Sometimes I couldn't get them motivated, so they weren't engaged. This is a challenge, and it becomes more of a challenge as your students get older. However, it is an absolutely critical pieces of the learning process, because when our kids are motivated to read and learn, they become more engaged in reading and learning, and they then have better achievement. And when we reach that better achievement, that's when our MOE goals begin to be met. That's when our kids perform better on those high stakes assessments. And that's when we get that joy out of teaching so much. So now, thinking about those two things, ladies and gentlemen, and noting that they are not always easy to do in our classrooms, I would find myself asking, well, how can I do this? How can I increase that motivation and engagement so that I can meet those outcomes by the curriculum I need to follow and to ensure that my students are successful on high stakes tests? Well, from research, there is a proven framework that will help you do all of those things. And that framework is called cross-curricular teaching and learning. Now, what is cross-curricular teaching and learning? Cross-curricular teaching and learning is an approach, so it's something you do in your classroom, that consolidates your efforts and your students' learning across disciplines. Let me give you an example. Now, when I was in school, anywhere from a kindergarten student at the age of 5, all the way up through my graduate studies as an adult, most of my learning experiences took place in these kind of siloed subjects. So maybe in the morning for an hour and a half, I did math with my teacher. Then we would move on to English language arts for another 90 minutes. Then in the afternoon, maybe we would do science and maybe we would do social studies. Okay. Now, if that sounds something similar to how you learned as a student, give me a smiley face in the chat box. Does anybody remember that as a student, that maybe you went to math class and then you went to English class? Yeah, look at all those smiley faces come in. This is quite common. And there's nothing inherently wrong with this approach. It just doesn't support that motivation and it doesn't necessarily support that engagement and those higher level skills that are being called upon in the MOE 108 and the high stakes assessments, as does when these subjects or disciplines become integrated. So instead of being separate, a cross-curricular approach consolidates or joins together all of these efforts and student learning across the disciplines. So there is logical connections between all of these different subjects and possibly more. Now, I mentioned that this is a research-based approach. And what we have found, or what others that have studied this have found, is that when teachers adopt a cross-curricular approach to meet their standards, to adhere to their curriculum, and for students to perform better on exams, a cross-curricular approach deepens learning of the discipline area skills, the content, and 21st century competencies such as problem solving and knowledge application. Now notice I underlined problem solving and knowledge application. That's because that's what your MOE 108 is calling for. So we know that there would be a connection between that curriculum and this approach. We also know from research that a cross-curricular approach really encourages collaboration in a school across educators. And I know that as an educator myself, one of the things that I found the most valuable was when I can collaborate and connect with my colleagues. And cross-curricular approaches really help to do that. So now we talked about the how or the what. So now well, what resources do I use to do this? And how do I use this in my classroom? We're going back to that practical piece. I want to take all this stuff and I want to make it practical. So what can I use to implement this in my classroom? So as I walk you through how you can implement this in your classroom and some ideas that you can use tomorrow, I'm going to use 3 different programs that are part of the Learning A to Z suite. Those programs that I'm going to highlight today are Raz-Plus, Science A to Z, and Vocabulary A to Z. Now, if anybody uses any of these programs already, please feel free in the chat box to tell me which one you use. But for those of you that are new to these programs, I'm going to give a very brief overview before walking you through how you can use this in your classroom to support cross-curricular teaching. Great, I see lots of Raz-Pluses coming up. Good. Okay, so what is Raz-Plus then? So all the programs, Raz-Plus, Science A to Z, and Vocabulary A to Z, are digital programs that are both for the teacher and for the student. So these 3 programs are going to give you, the teacher, lesson plans, resources, activities, hands-on experiments, everything that you need to do what you do best, to teach either that subject matter, English or science, or to join those 2 together for this cross-curricular approach. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as you see how some of these resources are used, you're also going to notice that they come in multiple formats. And this is going to be really supportive if you're back face-to-face with your students, or I know in Taiwan, you have been in a lockdown situation for quite some time. If you find yourself teaching online for an extended period of time again, all of these resources are going to go both in that type of setting or in a traditional classroom. Okay. So let's go ahead then with that brief overview and spend the rest of our time talking about how do we put this all together. How can I take the resources, use a cross-curricular approach, to help ensure that I'm meeting those really new demands that have been put forth by your MOE 108 and your high stakes assessments. So to help me walk you through some ideas for how you might do this in your classroom, I want you to think about a race. Okay. Do I have anybody in the audience that are runners that run races? Give me a smiley face if you run races. I have to say I've never run a race ever in my life. But do I have anybody that runs races? All right, I'm not seeing any of those smiley faces coming up. So, oh, I did. I see Gary's giving me a thumbs up. All right, Gary, maybe you're our lone runner here in the group tonight. All right, so none of us are runners other than Gary, but I want us to think about a race, okay? When I was in the classroom preparing for cross-curricular teaching, I often thought about that whole process like a race. So, for example, I needed to prepare for the race, okay? If I was to run a race, I certainly wouldn't put my shoes on and start going outside and running the race. I wouldn't do very well. I would need to practice and prepare myself. It was the same thing when I was preparing for cross-curricular teaching experiences in my classroom. I needed to do a lot of preparation. So I'm going to walk you through some ideas for that preparation. Then once I prepared for that race, you can run the race. That's when all that teaching happens. So I'm going to give you ideas for how you can teach in that cross-curricular approach. And then finally, we're going to come across the finish line. And I'm going to show you how you can use data and reports so that you can prepare for the next race. All right, so now that we're thinking about races, I want everybody to pretend you're putting on your shoes, getting ready for that race. All right, so I've got mine on. Hopefully you got yours on because we're getting ready to train. So at the beginning of your training, maybe you just run a little bit, or maybe you even just do some stretching or something really light. Well, that's what we're going to start with our cross-curricular approach. We're going to start first by thinking, what are my content objectives that I want to meet? What are my language objectives that I want to meet? What are my concepts that I want to attach or what I want to attack? And what are my assessment considerations? So as I'm preparing for this cross-curricular experience, I'm starting by thinking of these things. And where am I going to get these things? Well, most likely these are going to come out of my MOE 108 curriculum, or perhaps it's coming out of any other types of curriculum or standards that I have to meet as a teacher in my school, okay? So all of this is typically somewhere for us as teachers. We just need to pull out which ones we need to focus on for a cross-curricular experience, okay? Now, once you kind of know what you want your students to accomplish in a cross-curricular experience, you need to start organizing then those resources so that you can get to the point where you are running the race, or in our situation, where you're teaching. So what are some things that you can do as easy steps to prepare for that? So after I know what I want to teach, one of the things that I like to do when I'm preparing for cross-curricular experiences is to come up with an essential question. Now, an essential question, teachers, is a question that cannot be answered very easily. A student should not be able to say yes or no. A student shouldn't be able to give one answer. Perhaps the question can be answered in multiple ways. That is that higher level thinking that's being called for in that MOE 108 curriculum. So you want to come up with that, yes, exactly, critical thinking. You want to be able to come up with that essential question that your students can answer, okay? Now, once you come up with that question, then you can start organizing your materials.